It was a stunning turn of political events in Argentina. President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner experienced a serious setback in the polls. Her coalition, the Front for Victory Party, performed poorly in the country's latest primary and as a result could struggle to retain control of Congress in October's midterm elections. A weak economy, inflation, and corruption allegations are all possible factors behind the decline in her popularity. But some analysts blame it on the long political battle over judiciary reform. The government rolled out 6 bills to democratize the system, but were rushed through Congress and resulted in a political storm. In June, the main bill was knocked down by the Supreme Court. Our correspondent Joel Richards explains why this issue has impacted so many and polarized the nation.
Still the #1 force in Argentine politics, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner's government is at a crossroads. High inflation, currency exchange restrictions and allegations of corruption have all led to a series of mass demonstrations against the government. This mood was reflected by a poor performance in the recent primaries.
2 years ago, Cristina Kirchner was re-elected with a historic margin, 54%. This year, with luck, the vote will reach 35%. This means that 20% of the voters are looking to other political forces.
Those in opposition consider this recent blow to the government points to a loss of power at the Casa Rosada. A controversial recent attempt to reform the judiciary also failed. Justice is slow in Argentina, impunity is deeply ingrained, and there's little faith or trust in the system. Last December, politicians voiced outrage and protesters clashed with police. A court had acquitted 13 people charged with running a sex slavery ring on a case that made national headlines. And corruption is largely to blame. A recent poll shows that 72% of Argentines think that corruption went up, while only 9% think the opposite. The need for a comprehensive reform of the judiciary has long been proposed by civil rights groups. Few disagree with the need for an overhaul of the system, as Sebastian Pilo from the NGO ASIG explains.
The Argentine justice system has serious problems. It's bureaucratic, inefficient, not transparent, and with little access to low-income sectors of society.
Despite the need for change, this year's attempt by the Cristina Fernández de Kirchner government to reform the judiciary was highly contentious. Protests formed outside Congress as senators and deputies voted on the bill presented by the government. While those in favour claimed the reform would create a more representative judiciary, there were those in opposition who went as far as to compare the reform to the 1976 coup d'etat, saying that it was anti-democratic. One key reform would have politicised the Magistrates' Council. Members would be nominated by political parties and voted for in elections. It's this council that oversees the judiciary. Another controversial article would limit injunctions filed against the state. This was widely viewed as a response to the government's standoff with Clarín, in which the Supreme Court accepted the multimedia group's injunction that continues to prevent a new media law taking effect. Many organisations, including Human Rights Watch, warned that this reform would give Argentina's ruling party control of the council that oversees the judiciary, and in turn it would compromise its independence.
We need a judiciary that stands up to authorities, whoever is in power, and say, you are violating our rights. If the judges are selected by the government, they won't be able to prosecute them. They won't have the independence nor the power to fulfill their role.
On the day of the vote in the Supreme Court, the group Justicia Legítima, Legitimate Justice, outlined their support of the bill. The judge, Maria Laura Garrigós, told CCTV that the reform was necessary to consolidate democracy in Argentina.
The reform is necessary to democratize the republican system of this country. The judiciary should change by leaving corporations aside.
The government and many groups in favour of the reform stressed the importance of the popular vote in creating a more representative justice system. But the Supreme Court voted 6-1 against the bill, a ruling that many Argentines were in favour of. After the economic crash in 2001, the president, Eduardo Luis Dualde, promised that whoever had saved their money in dollars would receive dollars. But in the devaluation of the peso, thousands lost their life savings.
They
forced me to change my savings from dollars to pesos at a very low rate. After paying fees and lawyers, I ended up with less than 55% of what I deposited. It was awful.
Hector Dalke, a retired self-employed businessman, remembers how it was filing an injunction that saved him from ruin.
I went to Banco France's with a document from a judge. In just 1 week, the bank returned all the money to my account. This was my whole life savings. Later, I found out that not many people could get their money back.
Millions of Argentines lost their savings as the state blocked their accounts in what was known as the Corralito. The constitutional lawyer Alejandro Reinaldi says that the reform would make those kinds of claims made by Dalke unviable.
The government proposal will limit the resolution to a 6-month period. After that time, if the issue is not resolved, the case will be closed. That period of time is too short. I believe that this violates people's rights.
While the reform has been stalled, the debate nonetheless has not ended. The judge, Maria Laura Garrigós, says the judiciary and politics are necessarily united.
The judiciary cannot ignore party politics, which create our daily reality. Should we have a free dollar or not? Can we export or import? This is what is then taken to courts for judges to decide. This cannot be ignored.
So the question remains whether the government has missed its opportunity or not. Reform is necessary, but there's resistance in Argentina to the kind of reform proposed by the government. Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, meanwhile, seems determined to continue with her original plan.
We are going to continue the democratization of the judiciary by the popular vote. Imagine what we could achieve with judges who voted, not just with the corporations, but rather with what our Constitution says.
This reform is over, but the government has repeated its desire to deliver a judiciary that represents the popular vote. Mid-term elections in October will give a more definitive sense of the share of power and whether the government will continue to work towards a reform of the judiciary or whether it will have greater concerns over its political future to consider.
Our thanks to Joel Richards for that report.